Have you ever found yourself tumbling down a late-night internet rabbit hole?
Oh, we all have, right?
You know the exact scenario. It's like 2 in the morning, the glow of your screen is the only light in the room, and you are suddenly deeply invested in ancient esoteric mysteries.
Naturally.
You're scrolling through all these articles about Hermeticism, alchemy, ancient Egyptian magic,
And then reality sort of sets in.
exactly. You realize that you are completely overwhelmed by this flood of vacuous clickbait infotainment. Half of it feels like it was, churned out by a generative AI that's just trying to sell you healing crystals or a manifestation course.
Yeah, the modern internet really is saturated with these incredibly simplistic surface-level takes on ancient esoteric traditions. People love the aesthetic of the ancient mysteries, but they rarely want to do the heavy lifting required to actually understand them.
Well, if you have been there, welcome to today's deep dive. We have the ultimate antidote for you.
We really do. Today, we are going straight to the source material. Or rather, we're looking at the work of a brilliantly analytical mind who went straight to the sources centuries ago.
We are exploring a brand new, unpublished translation of a primary Latin text from the year 1675. The book is called Noah's Ark, and it's written by Athanasius Kircher.
Kircher is fascinating. For those who might not be super familiar with him, he was a 17th century polymath, a Jesuit scholar, a polyglot who spoke multiple Middle Eastern and ancient languages.
He was basically someone who tried to synthesize all human knowledge.
Pretty much, yeah. And the whole rationale for a modern re-examination of his work is precisely because he represents this bridge between deep ancient tradition and the dawn of the modern scientific method.
And Noah's Ark is the perfect example of that bridge. Just based on the title, you might assume it's purely a theological defense of the biblical flood.
Which it is, but
But the way he approaches it, he writes it as a massive, sprawling encyclopedia of hard 17th century science. We're talking about dense chapters on pre-Newtonian physics, geology, metallurgy, geometry, hydrostatics.
he actually includes buoyancy diagrams for the arc.
Yes, diagrams that any modern physics or engineering student would immediately recognize. He was trying to rationalize and prove the biblical narrative using every single scientific and academic discipline available to him at the time.
He wanted to prove things with hard data, logic, and comparative analysis.
But for our mission today, we're actually skipping the buoyancy diagrams.
We'll save the hydrostatics for another day.
Right. Instead, we are zeroing in on a very specific portion of this text. It's part 3, chapter 7. Our goal today is to follow Kircher's exhaustive intellect as he untacks the true mythological roots of the founder of esoteric Hermeticism.
That really enigmatic figure known variously as Mercury, Thoth, or Hermes Trismegistus.
We're going to look at how Kircher uses primary sources, comparative mythology, and linguistics to offer exactly what modern internet-age lore lacks, which is actual scholarly rigor.
And what makes this specific section of Noah's Ark so compelling is that Kircher absolutely refuses to accept the popular myths at face value. He methodically breaks them down.
He really acts as a 17th century detective.
He does. He looks at Greek, Egyptian, Phoenician, and Arab traditions, cross-referencing all of them to find the historical core hidden beneath these layers of allegorical storytelling and, honestly, political ambition.
He's trying to solve a 3,000-year-old case of stolen identity.
That is exactly what it is.
So let's start with the Greeks then, because they're the ones who really made this complicated for historians.
Mm.
From what Kircher points out, antiquity didn't just have one Mercury. They had an entire roster of them. How many are we talking about here?
Up to 5 distinct figures, all carrying the name Mercury. Yeah, Kircher lists them out just to show how muddy the historical waters were. So the first was thought to be the son of Caelus and Hemera. The second was born of Liber, or Bacchus, and Proserpina.
Okay.
The third was the son of Jupiter and Maia. Some traditions add a fourth, born of Jove and Selene. But Kircher really hones in on the fifth Mercury as the key to untangling this specific esoteric knot.
This fifth Mercury, the one known by the title Argophontas.
Right.
Now, the backstory the Greeks tell here is wildly dramatic. Jupiter wanted to free a woman named Io. Unfortunately, Io had been turned into a cow.
As one does in Greek mythology.
Naturally. And she was being held captive by a figure named Argus. So Jupiter commands this fifth Mercury to deal with the situation. Mercury murders Argus, frees the cow woman Io, and then is forced to flee Greece.
He packs up, goes into exile, and heads straight to Egypt.
Right. Now, if you look at that purely literally, it sounds like an absurd fairy tale. A god killing a monster over a woman turned into livestock.
It sounds ridiculous today. But this is where Kircher brings in his primary classical sources to build a much more sophisticated case. He actually cites the Pontiff Gaius Cottus and the Roman statesman Cicero.
Who specifically reference this fifth Mercury fleeing to Egypt.
Exactly. But more importantly, Kircher brings in the ancient writer Macrobius to interpret this entire myth allegorically.
So Macrobius argues we aren't meant to take a literal cow and a literal murder at face value.
Not at all.
How does he decode the story of Argus and Mercury?
Macrobius explains it entirely through the lens of ancient astronomy. The figure of Argus, or Agros, represents the sphere of the fixed stars in the night sky.
Because Argus was famous for having 100 eyes.
Which perfectly mirrors a sky full of twinkling stars.
That makes so much sense.
And Mercury, in this allegory, represents the sun. So when the myth says Mercury slays Argus at his rising, it is actually just a poetic way of describing the sunrise. The intense, brilliant light of the morning sun washes out and vanishes the light of the other stars.
Wow. That reframes the entire narrative.
It's beautiful, really.
And according to the myth, when this fifth Mercury, representing the sun, or this illuminating force, arrives in Egypt, his cultural impact is massive.
Oh, he becomes a foundational civilizing force. According to the Greek traditions Kircher analyzes, this Mercury is honored by everyone in Egypt because of his profound learning. He brings astronomy, literature, and gives laws to the Egyptians.
He practically builds their civilization.
Yeah, he prescribes a peaceful way of living to preserve society. He commands the rights of the sacred scriptures and institutes entire colleges of priests. He even dictates how they should worship native gods with ceremonies tied directly to the seasons of the year.
And Kircher doesn't just make these claims out of thin air either. He explicitly points out that the monuments of the Greeks relate this history, and he backs it up with primary citations. He's citing Cicero, Clement, Arnobius.
He is building a fortress of footnotes to show exactly what the Greeks believed.
But here's the catch. If the Greeks are claiming this Mercury fled their country and gave Egypt all of its civilization, where did the Greeks actually get that story? Did Kircher track down the original source?
He did, and he pivots directly to the Oriental commentators to find it. This is where the name of the figure shifts.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Kircher introduces a historian named Sanchoniaton of Berythius. This is an incredibly ancient source. He was a Phoenician author who lived shortly after Moses, and his work comes down to us via the later historian Diodorus.
And according to Sanchoniaton, among the Phoenicians, this great civilizing figure was called Thothus.
And to the Egyptians, he was known as Thoth.
Let's look at Thoth's resume,
Oh.
because it seems to completely overlap with what the Greeks claimed about their exiled Mercury. Diodorus reports that Thoth was the scribe of Saturn. He invented astrology, music, the chorus, the gymnasium, the lyre.
And most crucially, the invention of letters. The invention of letters is the absolute most important detail here. Because of his eloquence in teaching all of these arts and sciences, the Greeks called him Hermes, which translates to interpreter.
He was the interpreter of the gods' will to humanity.
Exactly. And in the Egyptian tradition, he is recorded as the top counselor to their great gods, Osiris and Isis.
Which brings up a pretty glaring historical conflict. Is this Egyptian Thoth, the ancient inventor of letters, the exact same person as the Greek Mercury, who supposedly fled Greece after killing a guy with 100 eyes?
This is where Kircher applies a brilliant critical lens. He points out a massive, systemic instance of cultural appropriation by the Greeks.
Cultural appropriation in antiquity.
Very much so. Kircher notes that figures like Orpheus and later other Greek poets and historians essentially transferred older Egyptian history onto their own newer culture. They took profound Egyptian achievements and slapped Greek mythological names on them to claim ownership of that intellectual heritage.
That completely changes the perspective on the Argus myth. They reverse-engineered a Greek origin story for an Egyptian god.
They absolutely did.
And Kircher brings in some surprising admissions from the Greeks themselves to prove this right.
He brings in Plato. Plato, arguably the most influential Greek philosopher, openly admitted in his own writings that the invention of letters belonged to the Egyptian Thuthus, or Thoth, and not to the Greek Mercury who slew Argus.
Kircher uses the Greeks' own greatest philosopher to dismantle their mythological land grab. That is incredible.
And he doesn't stop with texts. Kircher brings in physical, archaeological evidence to back it up.
Right, he cites an ancient inscription carved directly onto the tomb of Isis. The inscription reads, "I, Isis, am queen of all these regions, instructed by Hermes."
He also references the sacred Hermetic book, which features a profound philosophical dialogue between Isis and her son, Horus.
In that sacred text, Hermes is constantly referred to as the mind. The text even imagines God, the prince of the universe, speaking directly to Hermes, calling him the soul of his soul and assigning him the immense task of forming mankind.
He is called the father of all counselors and the thrice great Master Hermes. So Kircher uses all of this to firmly anchor Hermes in deep Egyptian antiquity, entirely separate from the Greek fables.
But Kircher's investigation doesn't stop there. He is too careful a scholar to just point to Thoth and say, case closed, Thoth is Hermes Trismegistus.
Because the plot thickens.
It really does, because as Kircher discovers in the surviving dialogues, Trismegistus himself admits that there was another Hermes who came before him.
Right, there was a first Hermes and a second Hermes.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To solve the mystery of this first Hermes, Kircher has to cast a massive global net. He pulls from Hebrew, Chaldean, Syriac, and Arab traditions.
He even accesses obscure archives, like an ancient commentary kept in Rome at the College of Neophytes.
Which was essentially a specialized hub for translating foreign ancient texts into Latin.
Exactly. Specifically, he looks at documents from a place called the House of Melchizedek.
And what he pieces together from all these diverse cross-cultural sources is fascinating. The first Hermes, known in foreign tongues as Idris, was actually the biblical patriarch Enoch.
This is a monumental synthesis of traditions. Enoch, the son of Jared, who lived before the great biblical flood.
Kircher notes that texts across multiple cultures describe Enoch as the first to assert the true faith in God. He was the original inventor of mathematical arts and a man of such incredible virtue that he famously did not experience a normal mortal death, but was taken up directly by God.
His legacy was so profound that long after the flood, anyone who achieved wondrous things with science or secret arts was given the honorary title of Idris, which translates to an investigator of hidden things.
It became a title of supreme intellectual respect.
And Kircher finds an incredible mathematical connection to back up this link between Enoch and the Egyptian traditions.
The 365 years.
Exactly. The Hebrew Holy Scriptures explicitly state that Enoch lived exactly 365 years. Kircher explains that this is not a coincidence. This number perfectly matches the Egyptian civil year of 365 days.
So Kircher is suggesting that Enoch, the first Idris, the first Hermes, is the one who originally taught the Egyptians the system of time and years before the flood.
Precisely. And the ancient Egyptian astrologers took those 365 years of his life and extrapolated a massive mystical cycle from it.
How so?
By observing how the firmament in the night sky shifted slightly over long periods, they calculated what we still call the Platonic year, a massive cycle of 36,500 years.
Wow.
They believed that at the end of this great cycle, the celestial gods would change their stations and the entire universe would be restored to its original perfect state. And Plato actually learned this concept from the Egyptians, who based it on the lifespan of the first Hermes.
That establishes Enoch as the first Hermes before the flood, which brings us to the second Hermes, the one who lived after the flood, the figure we actually call Hermes Trismegistus.
Right, the thrice great.
Why did he earn that specific title?
Kircher turns to the writings of Arab authors like Al-Kandi and Salamis, as well as the Syriac philosopher More Isaac, who called Hermes Jovanith, to break down the three distinct reasons for that title.
Number one.
First, he was called the greatest because he was a priest of God. He showed the just, moral ways of the Lord to a struggling, post-flood humanity.
Second, he had supreme expertise in natural things. He was master of inventions, metallurgy, alchemy, and astrology.
He didn't just hoard knowledge. He used his scientific mind to practically help the daily necessities of human affairs.
And third, he was called the greatest because he created civil life and laws. He understood that no society could survive without structural regulations.
Kircher poetically describes these laws as the salt necessary for the preservation of human society.
So he was a priest, a scientist, and a lawgiver. Three pillars of civilization, thrice great.
That makes perfect sense in the title.
It really does.
Yeah.
But if you were tracking the timeline here, so what does this all mean? It sounds like a complete mess. We have Greek gods, pre-flood biblical patriarchs, Egyptian scribes. How does Kircher possibly reconcile these conflicting timelines without just throwing his hands up?
He looks for the human element. Specifically, he looks at ambition and pride.
Of course.
Kircher argues that the historical record became a mess because ancient kings and leaders were essentially stealing titles for political clout.
Ancient clout chasing.
Exactly. After the flood, figures like Cham, or Ham, the son of Noah, learned some of the sciences passed down from Enoch. But Cham mixed lawful mathematical arts with unlawful corrupt ones. Out of sheer insolence and pride, he claimed the glorious title of Idris, or Trismegistus, for himself.
It is ancient historical identity theft. It's the 17th century equivalent of someone today buying a fake university degree or purchasing a verification badge on social media to seem legitimate.
That's a great comparison. Cham was walking around wearing a title of genius that he hadn't fully earned.
But Kircher cuts through that noise. He identifies that the true second Hermes, the real Trismegistus, was a descendant of Cham named Taurus.
Taurus was the one who separated the good science from the corrupted arts and actually lived up to the immense weight of the title.
But pinpointing when Taurus, or Trismegistus, actually lived is another massive debate that Kircher has to referee. Some ancient historians, like Eusebius, claim that Hermes lived just a little bit before or even during the time of Moses.
Which Kircher dismantles completely using deductive reasoning.
How does he do that?
He looks at the scriptures, which state that Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians. Kircher points out what that phrase actually implies. You cannot be educated in the vast, complex learning of the Egyptians unless letters, writing, and scientific categorizations are already deeply established in the culture.
Let's pause there, though. Could Moses not have simply learned an oral tradition? Why does Kircher definitively prove it had to be written letters?
Because the sheer volume of all the learning of the Egyptians, their mathematics, their astronomy, their architectural geometry, cannot be sustained or taught at a high level purely through oral tradition. It requires a massive written corpus.
Right.
Therefore, Moses couldn't have been a contemporary of the man who invented the alphabet. The alphabet and the resulting scientific literature had to be ancient history by the time Moses was even born.
That makes a lot of sense. So Kircher proves that Hermes could not have been a contemporary of Moses, nor could he have been one of the later pharaohs. Kircher places Trismegistus much further back, during what the Egyptians called the dynasty of the gods, which far preceded the pharaohs. He aligns this roughly around the time of the biblical Abraham.
Having placed him historically around the time of Abraham, Kircher then has to tackle the debate about his lifespan.
Because ancient authors couldn't agree on this either.
Right. Some commentators said he lived 180 years. Another historian named Boissard said 190 years. And then some Arab texts claimed he lived exactly 365 years, perfectly mirroring the first Hermes, Enoch.
A 365-year lifespan certainly sounds more mythological than historical. How does Kircher parse that?
He explains exactly why the Arab and Egyptian texts claim that 365-year lifespan. It wasn't based on a historical birth and death record. It was based on mysticism.
Right.
The ancient Egyptians had a deeply held belief in metempsychosis, which is the transmigration of souls, or reincarnation.
Right.
Because Trismegistus was so brilliant, they believed that the soul of the first Hermes, Enoch, had literally reincarnated into the second Hermes. To make the poetry and the math perfectly symmetrical, they retroactively assigned him the exact same lifespan of 365 years.
So Kircher, acting as the rigorous scientist, doesn't buy the poetry as literal fact. He logically settles on the 190-year lifespan proposed by Boissard, noting that 190 years perfectly harmonizes with the massive amount of historical deeds attributed to him.
He slices right through the superstition to find the most historically plausible number.
And he applies that exact same rational lens to the most unbelievable sensational claim of all regarding Hermes Trismegistus.
His supposed bibliography.
The 36,000 books.
Yes.
The ancient authors Iamblichus and Manetho made this incredibly wild claim. They stated on the record that Hermes Trismegistus wrote exactly 36,529 books.
Which is staggering.
If you take that literally, the physical logistics in the ancient world are impossible. Did the man ever sleep? Did he have a printing press hidden in a pyramid?
This is where modern internet lore completely fails, but Kircher succeeds by understanding the linguistics. Kircher clarifies a crucial translation error.
Right.
In this specific ancient context, the word translated as books does not mean literal bound volumes of papyrus sitting on a library shelf. The original term they were referring to was nikum.
What exactly is a nikum?
A nikum refers to an individual hieroglyphic system, a single scientific conclusion, or a specific philosophical thesis.
Right.
If Hermes adduced a new geometric principle, that single proof was a nikum. If he categorized the medicinal property of a specific plant, that was a nikum.
So it's akin to counting every single mathematical proof, scientific abstract, or data point a modern scientist publishes over their entire career as a separate book.
Exactly. So when you understand the linguistic context, it isn't 36,000 paperback novels. It is 36,000 individual scientific or philosophical propositions formulated over a 190-year lifespan.
It is still the mark of a staggering once-in-a-millennium genius, but it's not a physical impossibility.
Furthermore, Kircher explores how Hermes published these Nicome. He notes that Hermes did write common knowledge, basic sciences, and daily necessities on papyrus for the general public.
But he intentionally engraved the most secret, sublime arcana on stone columns and obelisks.
Right.
Why hide the best stuff on stone columns?
It was a moral prerequisite for knowledge. Kircher quotes a text where Hermes explicitly says, "These stone carvings are designed to remain invisible and undetected by anyone who has transgressed this discipline." The profound, universe-altering truths were hidden in plain sight on these obelisks, written in complex hieroglyphs that were completely incomprehensible to anyone who hadn't rigorously prepared their intellect and purified their moral character.
You couldn't just stumble upon enlightenment. You had to earn the capacity to even read it.
Which is such a massive contrast to how we consume information today, expecting everything to be easily digestible in a 10-second video.
Looking at this entire chapter, the genius of what Athanasius Kircher achieved in 1675 is phenomenal. He completely refutes the modern and even ancient tendency to simplify these historical divisions into one monolithic figure.
He took a profoundly complex global puzzle and used primary sources, comparative linguistics, and rigorous deduction to find the common denominator.
He tracked down ancient identity theft.
He spotted Greek cultural appropriation, and he separated mystical allegories about stars and souls from actual historical timelines.
He respected the source material enough to interrogate it deeply, rather than just accepting the most entertaining version of the myth.
Kircher's analysis proves that there are always multiple perspectives to consider. The Greeks had one view, the Egyptians another, the Hebrews another. Finding the truth requires looking at all of them and critically navigating through the noise.
To you listening right now, consider the contrast here. Think about Kircher's 17th century scholarly rigor, his cross-referencing of Latin, Syriac, Arabic, and Hebrew texts just to figure out who one person was.
Yeah.
Now compare that to today's simplistic, pop culture, new age Hermeticism. The stuff you see online strips away all this incredible historical nuance, all the cultural crossover, just to sell a simplified meme about manifesting your reality.
Kircher shows us that true esoteric knowledge isn't cheap. It requires work, critical analysis, and a deep respect for the complexity of the past.
We are going to leave you with one final, lingering thought to explore on your own today. If an encyclopedic mind from the year 1675 could use comparative mythology to carefully slice the difference between literal history, ambitious identity theft by ancient kings, and poetic astronomical allegory.
What else are we missing?
Exactly. What other popular historical myths are we currently misunderstanding, simply because we are too lazy to look at the primary sources? The truth is usually far more fascinating than the clickbait. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we'll catch you on the next one.